A man holding a rifle pressed the barrel against a tired hospital nurse and told him he had just become a hostage. The gunman believed he had grabbed the softest target in the room, a widower in faded blue scrubs, a quiet man who flinched at nothing and begged for nothing. What the gunman did not know was that this man had spent 10 years carrying broken people out of places that do not appear on any map. And what he truly did not know was that there was exactly one reason this nurse intended to walk out of that building alive. One small reason folded into a neat square and tucked into the chest pocket of his scrubs, right over his heart. So why did three armed professionals choose the one man in that hospital they should have feared the most? And why did everything that happened next come down to a single folded piece of paper? The road to that lobby began 2 days earlier, and to understand it, you have to meet the nurse first. Nobody paid much attention to Nurse Daniel Carter, and that was exactly how he liked it. St. Brennan Medical Center on the east side of Brackenridge employed more than 300 nurses, and Daniel was just one more face among them. 36 years old, short brown hair, a calm way of moving, blue scrubs washed so many times the color had gone soft as old denim. Most of the doctors barely registered him on a busy day. The patients loved him. His coworkers respected him, but almost nobody really knew him. They knew he always volunteered for the brutal shifts nobody else wanted. They knew he never once panicked when a patient was crashing and the room turned to chaos. They knew that when every other set of hands in the building started to shake, Daniel stayed perfectly still. What they did not know was why. The truth sat buried beneath 10 years of military service, of the kind that never shows up in a background check. Daniel had been a combat medic with a special operations unit, the man they sent in when a team was pinned down and someone was bleeding out under fire. He had kept hearts beating with his bare hands while the world came apart around him. He had learned, in the worst possible classroom, that fear is just information, and that a steady hand is a choice you make on purpose, that life was over. At least, that is what he told himself every single morning. These days, there was a quieter, softer reason to keep his hands steady. He was a father, and he was raising his little one alone. His wife, Sarah, had died 2 years earlier, and there were still mornings when he reached across the bed before he remembered she was gone. He did not talk about it. He got up, packed a small lunch, drew a smiley face on a paper napkin the way Sarah always used to, and dropped his child at school with the same words every single day. I will be there at the gate when the bell rings. I promise. Here is the small detail that matters most in this entire story. Every single morning, a little hand pressed a fresh drawing into his palm before school. A crayon horse, a lopsided sun, a purple dog, whatever the night before had dreamed up. And every single morning, Daniel folded that drawing into a careful square and slid it into the chest pocket of his scrubs, right over his heart, where it stayed until he came home. He had never once worked a shift without one. Remember that pocket. It is the whole story. For 2 years, that quiet routine worked perfectly, until the ambulance arrived. It began like any other shift. The emergency department was packed, every bed full, the doctors moving fast. Daniel moved calmly through the noise, checking medications, settling a frightened old woman with a broken hip. Then the radio crackled. The bay doors slammed open, and the trauma team mobilized for a gunshot victim. Male, mid-30s, critical condition. The patient was bleeding badly. Multiple wounds, almost certainly internal damage. The team fought to stabilize him, and Daniel was right in the middle of it, his hands already working. Then the unconscious man's arm shot up, and his fingers locked around Daniel's wrist with shocking strength. His eyes opened for a single second. Found Daniel's face, and he whispered 3 words. They found me. Then his eyes rolled back and the monitor began to scream. The doctors swarmed, and nobody noticed the way Daniel went very still. Nobody, except Dr. Caroline Hayes, the chief of emergency medicine, 45 years old, and the most observant person in the building. For 1/2 of 1 second, she saw something cross Daniel's face that she had never seen there before. Not the focus of a nurse working a trauma, fear. Then it was gone, smoothed away so completely, she almost doubted she had seen it. She frowned. Something felt wrong, and Caroline Hayes had learned a long time ago to trust that feeling. The gunshot victim was rushed up to surgery. The emergency room tried to settle back into its rhythm. Daniel kept working, but his eyes had started drifting toward the entrance, toward the windows, toward the ambulance bay. Scanning, counting, old habits, the dangerous kind, the kind he had spent 2 years trying to bury. Then he saw them. 3 men coming through the main doors. Good clothes, calm faces, the easy confidence of men who own every room they walk into. Most people would have looked right past them. Daniel did not, because he noticed the way they read the exits, the way one of them shifted his angle, so a security camera never caught him straight on, the way they spread across the lobby without ever appearing to coordinate. These were not visitors. These were professionals. One of them looked directly at Daniel for half a second, then looked away. And Daniel's blood ran cold because he recognized the man. Not his name, not his face, his eyes. There is a particular flatness in the eyes of a person who has decided that other human beings are simply obstacles, and Daniel had spent a decade learning to spot it across a crowded room. He turned away and kept his face blank, but every alarm inside him was ringing. He stepped into a supply room, closed the door, and pulled out his phone. There was a number in his head he had not dialed in over 2 years, a number that belonged to the life he had walked away from. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then he stopped. Maybe 2 years of peace had finally cracked something loose, and he was seeing ghosts in the daylight. He put the phone back in his pocket. He would replay that single moment of hesitation for the rest of his life. At exactly 17 minutes past 3, the first scream tore through the lobby. Then came the gunshot. The sound slammed off the walls, and the whole building seemed to freeze in place. A second shot. A third. People dropped to the floor. Families crawled for cover. A security guard near the entrance went down and did not get up. And standing in the center of it all were the 3 men, except now the friendly smiles were gone. The good clothes had opened over body armor, and the rifles were up and level. Daniel did not panic. The training that had never truly left him took the wheel before he could even think. While every instinct in that lobby screamed at people to run, Daniel did the strangest thing. His hand moved up to his chest pocket and pressed flat against it, once the way another man might touch a cross. Then he went still and started to read the room the way he had been taught a lifetime ago. 3 shooters visible, almost certainly more elsewhere. Rifles, plate carriers, military-grade equipment. This was not a robbery. This was an operation, and it had a purpose. The lead gunman grabbed a hospital administrator by the collar and pressed a pistol to the man's temple, and the lobby went silent as a held breath. His voice came out calm, and even the voice of a man who had done this before. "Nobody moves," he said. Nobody did. "We only want one person. Bring us the patient from operating room 3, and nobody else gets hurt." It was a lie. Daniel knew it in his bones. Men who arrive with body armor and a plan do not intend to walk anyone out alive. The hospital director stepped forward with his hands raised, trying to reason with him. The gunman struck him across the face with the pistol, and the man dropped, blood running from his nose onto the polished floor. "Anyone else want to negotiate?" the gunman asked. Nobody moved, and then a soft, broken sound cut through the silence. A young pregnant woman near the wall had begun to cry. She had both arms wrapped around the swell of her belly, pressed into a corner, trying to make herself small and failing. The sound carried across the frozen lobby, and the lead gunman turned toward it. He was not angry. He was annoyed. The simple irritation of a man who heard human fear as a noise that needed to stop. He started walking toward her. Daniel moved before he made a conscious decision. He crossed that lobby in long, even strides and stepped directly between the gunman and the woman. The whole room seemed to stop breathing at once. The gunman stopped. He studied this man in faded scrubs who had simply walked into the open, and he smirked. "You volunteering?" the gunman asked. "She's terrified," Daniel said. His voice was perfectly steady. That was the very first thing the gunman noticed, and it bothered him. "So am I," the gunman said. A couple of his men laughed. Daniel did not. Then he smiled an ugly smile and pointed the pistol directly at Daniel's chest. "Congratulations," he said. "You just became my hostage." He grabbed Daniel's arm and yanked him toward the center of the room, away from the woman. "Move." Daniel let himself be pulled. That was the word that mattered. He let it happen. Years ago, an instructor had drilled one lesson into him until it became pure reflex. If someone takes control of your body, you take control of their mind. Daniel was not thinking about escape yet. He was gathering information the way a doctor gathers a pulse: the grip on his arm, the man's balance, his dominant hand, his reaction time, the exact reach of him. Every detail went into a file in his head. The gunman shoved Daniel to the center of the lobby and kept the pistol against his temple. Outside, squad cars had already surrounded the building, and a news helicopter was thudding somewhere overhead. Inside, the gunman's radio crackled. He listened, nodded, and smiled. "Good news," he murmured. Whatever they had been waiting for was getting closer. Then he looked at Daniel, really looked, and his eyes narrowed. "You're calm," he said. Daniel said nothing. "I said you're calm," the gunman repeated, pressing the pistol harder. "I'm a nurse," Daniel finally answered. "I handle emergencies all day." A few doctors exchanged glances. It sounded reasonable. The gunman did not buy it because he had noticed something. Daniel's hands were not shaking, not even slightly, not with a gun against his skull. Interesting. While they spoke, the surgical team was trapped in operating room 3, fighting to keep the gunshot victim alive. The man surfaced for a moment, gripped a surgeon's sleeve, and whispered, "Do not give me to them." "Who are they?" she asked. The patient's eyes filled with real terror. "The people who killed my whole team," he said. "They will not stop. They will kill everyone in this building." He was not afraid for himself. He was afraid for everyone else. Back in the lobby, the lead gunman kept studying his hostage, and something about Daniel would not stop tugging at him. Not the face, the posture, the way the man's eyes moved across the room, cataloging exits and counting shooters even now. He had seen that exact behavior before, in another life, in uniform. He leaned in close to Daniel's ear so no one else could hear. "Former military," he murmured. "What were you, a medic?" "I was a medic," Daniel said. "It was not a complete lie." It was a lie of omission. The gunman laughed softly. "No," he said, "you weren't. Medics don't watch the exits. Medics don't count shooters." He paused. "And medics definitely don't keep checking my reflection in the window glass." The lobby had gone completely silent. Daniel did not answer, because the man was right. The gunman stepped even closer and whispered, "Who are you?" Daniel looked into his eyes and gave him the smallest smile. It was not the smile of a hostage, and it unsettled the gunman immediately. Then a young nurse near the wall cried out. An elderly patient on oxygen was crashing, his monitors shrieking, his lips going gray. The gunman turned, irritated by the inconvenience, and then a slow, cruel idea moved across his face. He looked at Daniel. "Go," he said, "fix him." It was a test, and it was not a stupid one. Help the patient, and Daniel had to move away from him into the open. Refuse, and a man died in front of everyone. Daniel went. The gunman followed 2 steps behind, the pistol never wavering. Daniel knelt by the old man, and here is where something true and useful lives inside this story. He did not panic, and he did not guess. He checked the airway first, then traced the oxygen tubing with 2 fingers the way every good nurse learns to. And within seconds, he found it. The clear plastic line had been kinked beneath the bed rail in the chaos, and the flow valve on the wall had been bumped down to almost nothing. The machine was fine. The connection was the problem. It is the oldest truth in emergency care. When a patient suddenly fails, you check the simple things before the frightening ones. You follow the line before you fear the worst. Daniel straightened the tubing and turned the valve back up, and the old man's chest began to rise and fall again, slow and deep. And in the middle of that, kneeling on the floor with a gun at his back, Daniel's mind did a small and very human thing. It went home. It thought about teaching a stubborn little person how to tie a shoelace on the front step last Sunday. The loops too big, the laughter too loud. That thought was an anchor. It kept his hands steady better than any training ever had. The old man stabilized. Even the gunman looked, for 1 second, reluctantly impressed. Then he looked at Daniel's hands again, still not shaking. Outside, the police command post was coming apart. Negotiations had gone nowhere. The men inside refused every offer. Then a black SUV with no markings rolled up to the line, and a tall, gray-haired man with an unmistakable military bearing stepped out. The police commander demanded identification, looked at the credentials he was handed, and went pale. The credentials disappeared back into the man's coat. "What do you need?" the commander asked. His whole tone changed. The newcomer looked at the hospital and asked one quiet question. "Is Daniel Carter inside?" The commander blinked. "One of the nurses?" he asked. The man nodded and let out a long, slow breath, like someone facing a thing he had hoped to avoid forever. "Then, the men who took this building," he said quietly, "are in far more trouble than they understand. They just don't know it yet." Inside, the lead gunman's radio crackled again, and he smiled wide. The surgical wing had been breached. The target would be in their hands within minutes. And in that very moment, Daniel heard something the others could not. A sound he had spent a decade learning to dread, a small metallic click near the entrance. His eyes shifted. One of the gunmen was crouched beside a waiting room chair, fixing something small and electronic to its underside. A charge. And then Daniel understood the whole terrible shape of it. The hostage situation was never meant to end in negotiation. These men had never planned to leave. They had come to erase everyone in the building, the witness, the staff, the evidence, all of it, including, if it came to that, themselves. Something in Daniel went quiet and cold and clear. This was the exact feeling he had spent 2 years running from. And now, strangely, he was grateful it had never fully left. He stopped simply gathering information and started building a plan. He had counted 4 shooters in the lobby now, and a 5th back by the surgical hall, and he knew where each one stood. He knew the lead gunman's reach and reaction time down to the fraction of a second, because he had spent the last hour measuring it through every shove and every cruel whisper. The man had spent that same hour convincing himself he had broken a frightened nurse. He had it precisely backward. But Daniel could not move while the pistol sat against his head, so he waited, patient as stone, for the half-second he knew was coming. And while he waited, his free hand drifted up and pressed once against his chest pocket, against the folded square of paper over his heart. It was not a nervous gesture. It was a promise. He had told a small person at a school gate that he would be there when the bell rang, and Daniel Carter had never once broken that promise, and he was not going to start today. That was the thought that steadied the last inch of him. Not the training, the promise. The opening came when the radio pulled the leader's attention away, and the pistol drifted a few degrees off Daniel's temple. Half a second is an eternity to a man who has trained for it. Daniel's hand came up and swept the barrel toward the ceiling, and the shot the startled gunman fired punched harmlessly into the tiles overhead. Then Daniel was inside the man's guard, and the years came flooding back all at once, fast and economical, not one motion wasted. A strike to the throat, a twist that took the pistol out of the gunman's grip and put it into Daniel's. The leader hit the floor hard and stayed there, stunned, staring up at a man he had completely misjudged. "Down," Daniel said to the room, low and clear. "Everybody get down." Most people were already there. A second gunman swung his rifle up, and Daniel shoved a heavy steel supply cart straight into his path. The rounds smashed into metal and threw sparks across the tile, and the man crashed into the cart, and his rifle skidded away. A third gunman near the entrance brought his weapon up, then froze, because small red laser dots had bloomed across his chest. 1, then 5, then more than he could count. Glass shattered. "Federal hostage rescue team," a voice barked. Operators flooded the lobby. The siege, in the lobby at least, was over in seconds. But Daniel was not done, because something was still terribly wrong. He hauled the dazed leader up by his vest. "How many charges?" he demanded. "Where are they?" The man laughed, spat blood onto the floor, and shook his head. "No idea," he said. Daniel's grip tightened. "What?" he said. The gunman smiled a bitter smile and tipped his head toward the ceiling. "Those weren't ours," he said. The hospital intercom crackled to life, and a new voice came through it, Smooth and amused, the voice of the man behind all of it. The one nobody had seen, the one who had hired these men and aimed them at this building like a loaded gun. Impressive, the voice said. Truly impressive. Daniel looked up at the speaker mounted in the ceiling, and the voice continued, almost gentle. You always were difficult to kill, Carter. Every operator in the room turned to look at the nurse. Daniel's expression did not change. He knew the voice. His name was Marcus Webb. Years ago, Daniel had given testimony against him in a hearing about a private contractor who treated human lives as numbers on a spreadsheet, who had let men die to protect a profit margin and called it following protocol. Webb had walked free, and he had never once admitted he had done a single thing wrong. He had spent the years since convinced he was untouchable, and he had built this entire massacre to bury one witness and the man who had once exposed him, all in a single afternoon. Unfortunately, Webb's voice went on. As pleasant as a man ordering coffee, the hospital still comes down today. The intercom clicked off. One heartbeat later, every fire alarm in the building went off at once, and the truth landed on Daniel all at the same moment. The charges had never been about the lobby at all. They were buried deep in the bones of the building. The mechanical levels, the boiler room. A failure down there would take the whole structure and everyone in it down with it. He ran. The federal team followed, but Daniel was faster, years faster, down 4 flights into the old mechanical levels where the heat climbed and steam hissed from aging pipes and the air grew thick and dangerous. And there was Webb standing beside a control panel, gray suit, cold eyes, a small detonator in his hand, calm as a man waiting for a train. Hello, Daniel, he said. Walk away, Marcus, Daniel said. He stopped a few yards off. No, Webb said it instantly, without a flicker of doubt, because he genuinely believed he could not lose. Above them sat hundreds of patients, doctors, and families. Webb lifted the detonator and smiled. History, he said, is written by the people who survive it. He pressed the button. Nothing happened. The smile fell off his face. He pressed it again. Nothing. Again, nothing at all. He stared down at the device, baffled, then enraged. And Daniel let himself feel, for the first time in that whole long day, a small and genuine smile, because while everyone else had been focused on the lobby, Dr. Caroline Hayes, the one person who had seen the fear cross his face hours earlier and decided to trust it, had grabbed the facilities maps and a night engineer named Walter Briggs, and the two of them had gone down into the dark. They had found the wiring junction in the mechanical chase, and Walter, who had maintained that building for 19 years and knew its veins better than anyone alive, had cut the right line. Webb's masterpiece had been dead metal for the last 15 minutes. Webb's face twisted with fury. You let a doctor stop me, he said. Daniel's voice stayed even. Big mistake, he answered. Webb reached inside his jacket for a weapon. Too slow. Daniel closed the distance before the man's hand even cleared the fabric. One strike to take the pistol. One strike to put him on the concrete. The fight was over almost before it began, because men like Webb spend their whole lives hiding behind other people, and Daniel had spent his running toward the danger those men created. Federal operators poured into the room with their weapons up, but there was nothing left to do except put the cuffs on. Webb lay on the cold floor and finally understood. The hospital had not beaten him. The police had not beaten him. The government he had outmaneuvered for years had not beaten him. A widowed nurse, a doctor with a flashlight, and an old maintenance man with a pair of wire cutters had beaten him. The whole truth came apart fast over the following days, confirmed by people who finally felt safe enough to speak. The gunshot patient, recovered enough to give a statement, testified that Webb's people had hunted down and murdered his entire protection detail to silence what they knew. The captured lead gunman, facing the rest of his life behind bars, named Webb as the man who had planned and paid for the assault. And a federal forensic accountant laid the whole thing out in a sworn affidavit, the shell companies, the payments, the years of fraud that Daniel's testimony had first cracked open. Webb denied every word to the very end, insisting that he had only ever protected an asset and followed a protocol. He believed it right up until the cell door closed behind him. He was charged with conspiracy, with multiple counts of murder, and with domestic terrorism. The men he hired went down with him, and not one of them would ever walk free again. By the time the sun came up over the hills east of Brackenridge, the nightmare was over. The patients were safe. The families were safe. The charges had been carried out into the daylight by a bomb squad and made harmless. St. Brennan Medical Center still stood. Outside, reporters crowded the street and emergency lights washed across exhausted faces, doctors and nurses sitting on the curb, some crying, some laughing, some simply staring at nothing while their minds caught up with the night. Daniel walked out through the shattered front doors into the gray dawn, and he did not look at the cameras or the lights or the crowd. He walked to the edge of the parking lot, away from everyone, and only then did he reach into his chest pocket and take out the folded square of paper. He opened it with hands that, finally, after everything, were not quite steady. It was a crayon horse with a purple mane, a little smudged now, a little creased from the long night, and Daniel Carter, who had not cried in 2 years, who had kept his composure through a gunfight and a bomb, and the voice of a man who wanted them all dead, stood alone in an empty parking lot and wept. Not because of what had almost happened inside, because the bell at a certain school was going to ring in 3 hours, and for the second time in 2 years, he had been certain he would not be standing at that gate. And now he would. That was the only thing in the entire world that mattered to him. He folded the drawing back along its careful creases and slid it into his pocket, over his heart, where it belonged. And he went to make a phone call he had been afraid. All night he would never get to make. 6 weeks later, Daniel was back on the floor at St. Brennan, in the same faded scrubs, because when they offered him anything he wanted, he asked for only one thing: the same schedule, so he could still be at the gate when the bell rang. The hospital had quietly given him a commendation he had never asked for, and the staff treated him a little differently now, with a warmth that had something close to awe folded into it, but the work was the same, and the work was the whole point. And there was a fresh drawing folded into his chest pocket, right over his heart where one had always been and always would be. It was Dr. Caroline Hayes who finally said it out loud, on a quiet evening near the nurses' station. "You were special operations," she said. It was not a question. The secret was gone, and they both knew it. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then gave her a tired smile. "I was a medic," he said. She laughed, because by then she understood that the answer was the most impressive thing he could possibly have said. They had spent those 6 weeks orbiting each other. The doctor who had trusted a stranger's fear, and the nurse who had trusted her with the truth. And somewhere in there the orbit had tightened into something neither of them had gone looking for, and neither one wanted to stop. It was small and unhurried and entirely real, a quiet bit of grace at the end of a violent thing. When Webb saw the news photograph weeks later from inside a holding facility, the nurse he had written off as nothing standing easy and at peace, free and respected and quietly loved, he understood at last exactly how completely he had lost. The man he had tried to erase had everything that mattered. Webb had a number and a cell. There is a small park on Daniel's street, the kind with 2 swings and a slide gone pale from the sun. And on his first Saturday off, he sat on a bench there in the gold afternoon light, while a small voice somewhere behind him shrieked with the pure, total joy that only belongs to the very young. He did not have to watch every second anymore. He had learned that much. He just had to be there. At one point, a question floated over to him on the wind, the kind of enormous question that only a child can ask while hanging upside down from a piece of playground equipment. "Daddy, are you a hero?" Daniel thought about the surgeons who never once left their patient, and the young nurse who refused to let an old man die, and Caroline with her maps in the dark, and Walter and his wire cutters, and the federal operators who came through the glass. "Lots of people were heroes that day," he called back. "I was just one of them." There was a brief, deeply skeptical silence from the direction of the swings, The way a child receives an answer they have decided not to fully accept. And then, because the swings were more important than the conversation, the small voice moved on to the truly urgent business of going higher and asked if they could get ice cream on the way home. Daniel said yes. He said yes to all of it. And as the afternoon light spread gold across that small ordinary park, a man who had once carried the dying out of burning places sat on a bench and listened to the sound of his whole reason for living laughing into the wind. And he understood something simple and complete. The men who came to that hospital had chosen him because he looked like the easiest person in the room to break. They had it exactly backward, not because of the training or the missions or the records that do not exist. They had it backward because after losing the love of his life, after carrying a grief he never once spoke aloud, this man still got up every single morning and chose to be gentle, chose to be useful, chose to fold a crayon drawing over his heart and keep a promise about a school bell so that one small person could grow up safe and unafraid. That is the strength no armor can match. That is what those men never saw coming. And in the end, that is what made an ordinary single father the most extraordinary person in that building. If this story stayed with you, even a little, do one small thing before you go. Tap the like button, because it genuinely helps stories like this one reach the people who need a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the strongest. Subscribe and turn on the bell so the next story finds you when it is ready. And if you have a moment, tell me in the comments, have you ever watched someone get underestimated, dismissed, written off as nothing, only to prove every single person wrong? I read every comment, and those stories are the reason this channel exists. Before you go, one honest note. This story is a work of fiction. The names, the hospital, the city, the people, and the events were all created for this telling. And any resemblance to real people, living or gone, or to any real place or institution, is entirely coincidental. It was written to move you, not to report something that happened. But here is the part that is not fiction, and the reason I wanted to tell it at all. I keep coming back to one quiet idea. We have a habit of measuring people by the noise they make, by titles and uniforms, and the size of the room they command. And almost every time we get it wrong. The strongest people I have ever known never announced themselves. They simply showed up, did the hard and unglamorous thing, and went home to the small and ordinary lives they were quietly protecting. A man steadying a stranger's breathing with a gun at his back, holding on to the memory of teaching a child to tie a shoelace, that tells you more about real strength than any speech ever could. His secret was never the training. His secret was that after grief tried to take everything from him, he still chose to be gentle. He still chose to keep a promise about a school bell, and I think that exact choice is available to all of us, on far smaller and far less dramatic days than the one in this story. The next time you meet someone the world has decided to overlook, remember that you may be standing in front of the bravest person you will ever meet, and you would never know it. That is the whole reason this story exists. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I will see you in the next one.